Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The salvage rig reeked of burnt wiring and despair, a stench that clung to Elias Kane's clothes as he pressed himself against the rusted bulkhead. The cold metal bit into his back, grounding him as the transport's engines roared to life, their vibrations rattling his bones like a warning etched in iron. The air was thick, heavy with recycled oxygen and a faint metallic tang. His own blood, from a split lip, earned when a guard's baton had caught him during loading. Just a day ago, Elias had been branded Asset 492, another disposable piece in the Concord Dominion's vast machine. He'd failed an aptitude test, his hands too slow for the assembly lines, his mind too stubborn for their liking. Now he was bound for Sector Omicron 9, a name whispered in the labor camps like a death sentence. The end of the line for screw-ups. The overseer had sneered, shoving a cracked data slate into his hands. You're stuck with a reject named Veyra. Good luck dragging her dead weight. Veyra. A Klythian, according to her file. Neural implants fried, reflexes too sluggish for Dominion standards. Even the automated sorters had spit her out like scrap. The rig lurched forward, slamming Elias into a jagged crate edge. Through the scratched viewport, he watched the orbital station's neon sprawl blur into a gray smudge against the crimson haze of a dying star. Somewhere in the hold below, Veyra waited, the stranger he'd be chained to in whatever hell awaited them. The journey was a grueling slog through hyperspace rifts, each jump feeling like his body was being torn apart and reassembled wrong. By the time the rig groaned to a stop, his ears buzzed with a high-pitched whine, and his vision flickered with phantom colors. Move, scrap! A guard barked as the rear hatch hissed open, flooding the bay with air that scorched his throat, hot, laced with sulfur and a sharp bite of ionized decay. Elias stumbled down the ramp, squinting against a sky dominated by a swollen, violet sun that pulsed like a festering wound. The landscape was a nightmare of shattered technology. Twisted starship hulls, their surfaces slick with chemical frost, stretched toward the horizon like the bones of some ancient beast. Kane! A voice like gravel over steel cut through the haze. Commander Torrance stood nearby, a hulking figure with a face like weathered stone, his right hand replaced by a cybernetic claw that gleamed dully in the light. Beside him was a figure that made Elias's breath catch. Veyra was small, barely reaching his chest, her frame draped in a tattered jumpsuit that hung like a ghost of its former self. Her skin was a deep, iridescent green, flecked with bioluminescent motes that shimmered faintly. Her eyes, two black voids, were framed by scar tissue, as if someone had tried to etch a circuit board into her face. "This is your partner," Torrance said, his voice dripping with contempt, like he was pronouncing a life sentence. His claw twitched as he spoke, a remnant of some old wound. "She's half-blind, neural wiring shot. Dominion says rejects work in pairs. Maybe you'll keep each other alive long enough to pay for the fuel." Veyra stood still, her head tilted slightly, as if catching whispers on the wind. Elias felt her attention, not as sight, but as a pressure, like a sonar pulse washing over him. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, cringing at his own bluntness. Torrance's eyes narrowed, his claw flexing. "Neural overload from a botched augmentation," he said, his voice bitter with old scars. "Her kind were bred for signal warfare, hacking systems with their minds. Damn near crashed a dreadnought in the Fringe Rebellions. I was on that ship, lost half my crew to their tricks. She's a glitch, Kane. Keep her on a leash, or you're both done." Torrance stalked off, his boots kicking up clouds of corrosive dust. Elias turned to Veyra, who hadn't moved. Up close, he noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the way her fingers twitched like they were tracing invisible patterns. "I'm Elias," he said, softening his voice. She tilted her head toward him, her scarred face unreadable. "Elias Kane, Asset 492, she replied, her voice a low hum, accented with a cadence that prickled his skin like static. "You were partnered with Lena Voss. You carry loss in your shoulders, a weight that pulls you left when you walk." Elias froze, his blood turning cold. "How do you know about Lena? How do you know any of that? Your body speaks louder than your words." Veyra said, turning away. We need to move. The sun's radiation spikes soon. Without waiting, she started toward the salvage fields, her steps precise despite the uneven ground. Elias hurried to keep up, watching her navigate the treacherous terrain with eerie confidence, her scarred hands brushing the air like she was reading it. How do you know where you're going? He asked, sidestepping a jagged spar of metal. I feel it, she said simply. The vibrations, the currents in the air. They tell me what your eyes miss. Grid 4 Delta was a maze of wrecked starships, their hulls half buried in ash, pitted with plasma scars. The air shimmered with heat, and every breath tasted of rust and ozone. They worked in silence for hours, Elias fumbling with unfamiliar tools while Veyra moved with unsettling precision. She'd pause, tilt her head, then walk straight to a buried component, extracting it with a grace that felt almost otherworldly. How do you do that? He asked after she pulled a pristine quantum relay from a pile of slag. I hear the hum, she said, not looking up. Every machine has a song. The valuable ones sing louder. Elias watched her, expecting her to falter, but she never did. His hands blistered, his muscles burned, but Veyra showed no sign of slowing. Then the ground trembled. A low rumble, like a beast stirring beneath the ash, sent Elias staggering. Veyra's hand shot out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. Don't move, she whispered, her voice sharp with urgency. There's a void below. Your next step would have dropped you into a reactor shaft. Elias froze, heart hammering, and squinted at the ground. The ash looked solid, but now he saw faint cracks, the subtle shift where the surface hit a chasm. How did you know? Vibrations change over empty space, she said, releasing him. I've felt this place before. That night, under a sky bruised purple by the dying sun, Veyra built their shelter from scavenged panels and coolant pipes. Elias watched, awestruck, as she wove the materials together, her hands moving with a dancer's precision, guided by something beyond sight. Where'd you learn to do that? He asked as they settled into the lean-to, the wind howling outside. Veyra was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. No one taught me, she said finally, her voice distant. When your eyes fail, you learn to build by touch, by the pulse of the world. You survive because there's no other way. You said you felt this place before. Elias pressed. What did you mean? Another long pause. My mind was here, she said. My body left. They thought I died in a collapse, but I came back. This place, it remembers me. Elias didn't understand, but the weight in her voice stopped him from pushing further. He leaned against the shelter's wall, listening to the eerie moans of the salvage field, metal creaking, wind hissing through broken hulls, and Veyra's steady breathing beside him. Deep in the night, Elias woke to a sound that sent chills down his spine. Veyra was humming, a low, resonant melody that seemed to vibrate through the shelter's frame. The notes were alien, layered with harmonics that made the air pulse. As she hummed, faint lights flickered in the distance, not electric, but something older, like bioluminescent ghosts rising from the buried wrecks. Veyra, he whispered when the song faded. What was that? She turned her scarred face toward him, her black eyes glinting faintly. A signal hymn, she said. My people used it to call across the stars. Here, it wakes something else. Elias followed her gaze to the flickering lights. They weren't random. They pulsed in rhythm with her song, like a code buried in the planet's bones. The next days settled into a brutal routine. They rose before dawn, scavenged until the sun's radiation forced them to shelter, then worked again until night fell. Elias learned to trust Veyra's instincts, her warnings about unstable ground or hidden radiation pockets. She relied on his eyes to spot distant targets, his descriptions guiding her to salvage. They weren't alone in Grid 4 Delta. Their unit was a ragged crew of 12, each more broken than the last. There was Rhea, a former pilot whose nerve damage left her hands unsteady. Torm, a mechanic with lungs scarred by chemical burns, coughing with every step. Silas, a young coder whose augmented vision had failed, leaving him half-blind. They were the Dominion's cast-offs, sent to Omicron 9 to be ground into dust. On the 5th day, disaster struck. They were working a new section, a tangle of collapsed reactors where the salvage was buried deep. Elias was using a sonic probe to map the subsurface when a scream tore through the air, Rhea's voice, raw with panic. The ground had given way, a sinkhole swallowing 3 workers in a roar of ash and steel. Elias dropped his probe and ran toward the collapse, but Veyra was already there, perched at the crater's edge, her head tilted in that eerie listening pose. "Rhea's alive," she said, pointing to a spot 15 meters away. "2 others with her. Heartbeat's weak, but there." "How can you tell?" Elias demanded, his voice shaking. "Sound travels through ash differently than stone," she said, already climbing into the rubble. "Help me." They worked together, Veyra's hands reading the debris like a map, guiding Elias to shift beams without triggering another collapse. Her precision was uncanny, her scarred fingers tracing stress fractures in the metal. Within an hour, they'd reached Rhea, her arm pinned but alive. "Thank the stars," she gasped as they freed her. "I thought we were done." "Where are the others?" Elias asked. Veyra was already moving, her head tilted again. "This way. One's fading." It took another grueling hour to reach Torm and Silas, both barely conscious, trapped in an air pocket. As they dragged the survivors to safety, Silas grabbed Veyra's arm. "I know you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You were here last cycle. I saw you die in a collapse like this." Veyra froze, her body rigid. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. "What's he talking about?" he asked. Veyra turned to him, her scarred eyes unreadable. "My mind stayed here," she said, barely audible. "My body left. They rebuilt me, but the echoes never faded." Before Elias could press further, a shadow loomed over the field, Torin, flanked by 2 guards. "Kane, with me," Torin barked, his cybernetic claw gleaming. "Alone." Elias followed him to a prefab command post, its interior lit by flickering data screens. Torin sat behind a desk, a ration pack, real food, not the nutrient sludge they'd been eating, sitting beside a transfer form. "You've exceeded quotas 3 days straight," Torin said, his voice low. "Impressive, considering you're stuck with a glitch." Elias said nothing, his stomach twisting at the sight of the food. "I'm offering you a way out," Torin continued, sliding the form across the desk. "Back to the core worlds, clean slate, maybe a tech posting. Sign this. Say Veyra's unstable, a threat to the operation. She'll be recycled, quick and clean." Elias stared at the form, the promise of freedom burning in his chest. Lena's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her defiance, the way she died in a recycler for refusing to comply. "What happens to Veyra?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Torin leaned forward, his claw tapping the desk. "Standard disposal. You don't need to know the details." Through the command post's thin walls, Elias heard it, a faint hum, Veyra's voice, weaving that same signal hymn from their first night. It wasn't just a song, it was a pulse, a code interacting with the salvage field's buried systems. Lights flickered in the distance, responding to her voice. "What's she doing?" Torin snapped, following Elias's gaze. Elias stood and moved to the window. Veyra knelt beside a pile of wreckage, her hands pressed against a cracked data core. Symbols, alien, glowing, crawled across its surface. Among them, Elias saw his name, etched in Klythian script, pulsing like a heartbeat. She was building something, weaving his name into its core, marking him as, what? Protected? Chosen? He set the stylus down and stepped back. "No," he said. Torin's face darkened. "You're throwing away your life, Kane." "Maybe," Elias replied, meeting his gaze. "But it's my choice." He walked out, leaving the ration pack behind. Veyra looked up as he approached their shelter, her head tilted. "You chose," she said simply. "How did you know?" "Your pulse changed when they offered you freedom. It changed again when you refused." She touched the glowing data core. I was ready for either outcome. Elias knelt beside her, studying the alien symbols. What is this? A signal anchor, she said. If you'd left, it would have shielded you in transit. Since you stayed, it protects us both. What happened to you here? He asked, his voice soft. Veyra's fingers stilled on the core. They wanted to weaponize us, she said. Klythians can interface with systems directly, mind to machine. They pushed us too far, burned out our neural pathways. Most died. I survived, but my eyes, they took those to see if it would make me stronger. Elias felt sick. And it did? Yes, she said, her voice hollow. But it cost me everything else. When the program ended, they sent me here. I died in a collapse, or so they thought. When they rebuilt me, they didn't realize I remembered this place, every pulse, every frequency. Before she could say more, lights swept across the field. Transports landed, disgorging guards in combat suits. Torin's voice boomed through amplifiers. All assets to the central grid, now. New orders. Elias and Veyra joined the others, where Torin stood before a hollow display of their quotas. Half of you are below minimum output, he announced. You're now classified for disposal. Elias's blood ran cold. Veyra's breathing quickened beside him. Rhea, Torm, Silas, Veyra, terminated for inefficiency, Torin said, his eyes locking onto Elias. Kane, you're reassigned to a new partner. Report to the rig in 1 hour. No, Elias said, his voice cutting through the silence. Torin's claw twitched, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Excuse me? I said no, Elias repeated, stepping forward. Veyra saved 3 lives today. She's not the problem, you are. Torin's face flushed, his hand moving to his shock baton. You're protecting a weapon, Kane. Her kind crashed a dreadnought with a thought. You think she's broken? She's a goddamn WMD. The air hummed, the debris around them vibrating faintly. Veyra was reacting, her abilities stirring. You feel that? Torin snarled, pointing at her. That's not a reject. That's a threat. She's a person, Elias shot back. And she's chosen to save lives, not end them. Torin's laugh was bitter. Choice? They always start with saving lives. Then they remember what they are. Then your orders are wrong. The words hung in the air. Torin's claw closed around his baton. You want to die with her? Fine. He signaled the guards. Terminate them all, now. Before the guards could fire, a pulse ripped through the field, a sonic wave so intense it knocked everyone to their knees. The guards' weapons sparked and failed, their suits shorting out. Elias turned to see Veyra, her hands on a scavenged signal array, her voice the source of the chaos. Run, she said, her words clear despite the noise. This won't hold them long. They fled, Elias supporting Rhea, Torm and Silas flanking Veyra. Behind them, Torin's shouts faded as they plunged into the deeper salvage fields, where the wrecks grew denser and the ground more treacherous. Veyra led them through a maze of twisted steel, her instincts unerring. Where are we going? Elias gasped as they paused in the shadow of a shattered reactor core. The old signal vaults, Veyra said. Abandoned, too unstable for operations. I know the paths. They moved deeper, through passages that seemed impossible, gaps too narrow, ground too fragile. But Veyra navigated with precision, her mind reading the field's hidden frequencies. They stopped in a cavern formed by a collapsed transmitter array, its crystalline spires glowing faintly under starlight filtering through the debris above. We're safe here for now, Veyra said, settling against a pylon. They won't risk coming this deep. Elias looked at their group, Rhea, pale and shaking, Torm, coughing, Silas, staring into the dark. And Veyra, who looked like she'd finally outrun a ghost. What now? Elias asked. Veyra tilted her head, listening to something beyond his senses. Now I tell you what this place really is. Omicron 9 wasn't just a salvage field. It was a testing ground for Klythian signal tech, designed to turn minds like hers into galactic transceivers. The experiments failed, she said. But the network's still here, buried in the planet's core. I can feel it. It's alive. Elias's mind raced. That's how you navigate. You're tied to it. More than that, she said. It changed me. The neural damage wasn't just from the experiments, it was from the network itself. It burned out my eyes but linked me to this place. I'm not just blind, Elias. I'm part of it. Before he could respond, engines roared overhead. Searchlights swept the cavern, and Torin's voice echoed. You can't hide, Kane. Come out, or we'll bury you. Veyra stood, her posture shifting, less a victim, more a predator. They won't stop, she said. We have to take this place from them. Over the next hours, Veyra outlined her plan. The signal network was still active, powered by the planet's geothermal core. If they could reach its control hub, she could seize the facility's systems, defenses, transports, even the recyclers. It was built for my kind, she said as they navigated hidden tunnels toward the hub. They didn't expect us to survive and remember. They emerged in a chamber of glowing crystals, their hum making Elias's teeth ache. Veyra moved among them, her hands dancing over surfaces that pulsed in response. The guards are massing at the surface, she said, her voice harmonizing with the network. The hub's lightly defended. We can take it. And then? Elias asked. Veyra's scarred face turned to him, a faint smile breaking through. We make this place ours. A home for the broken. The crystalline chamber hummed with a life of its own, the air thick with a low, resonant thrum that made Elias Kane's skin prickle. The glowing spires towered above, their surfaces pulsing with faint light, as if the planet itself was breathing. Veyra moved among them like a ghost, her scarred hands tracing patterns only she could see, her black eyes glinting with purpose. Elias watched her, his heart pounding from their escape, his mind racing to process her plan. Take the signal hub. Seize Omicron 9. Turn a graveyard into a home. It sounded impossible, but the fire in Veyra's voice made him believe it could be done. Rhea leaned against the crystal pylon, her face pale, her unsteady hands clutching a scavenged water flask. Torm sat nearby, his coughs echoing in the cavern, each one sounding wetter, more ragged. Silas paced, his half-blind eyes darting nervously toward the shadows, as if expecting Torin's guards to burst through at any moment. The weight of their survival pressed down on Elias, heavy as the ash outside. They were a broken crew, but Veyra's plan gave them something to hold on to, hope, sharp and fragile as glass. How do we do this? Elias asked, stepping closer to Veyra. The hum of the crystal seemed to sync with her movements, amplifying her presence. This hub, it controls everything? Everything, she said, her voice steady but layered with that strange harmonic quality, like she was speaking to the network as much as to him. Defensive arrays, transport systems, even the recyclers. The Dominion built it to weaponize my kind, to turn our minds into relays for their commands. But they never understood what they created. The network's alive, Elias. It listens to me. Listens how? Torm rasped, wiping sweat from his brow. His scarred lungs made every word a struggle. You're saying you can just talk to this place? Veyra turned her scarred face toward him, her expression unreadable. Not talk. Sing. The network was designed to respond to Klythian neural patterns. When they burned out my eyes, they didn't realize they'd forged a stronger connection. I can feel every circuit, every pulse. I can make it ours. Silas stopped pacing, his voice sharp with doubt. And what's to stop them from bombing this place to ash once they figure out what you're doing? Torin's not stupid. He'll call for backup. He already has, Veyra said, her fingers pausing on a crystal's surface. The glow flickered, and a faint holographic display shimmered to life, showing grainy feeds of the surface. Dominion transports were landing, their hulls disgorging more guards, dozens of them, clad in combat suits, their weapons glinting under the violet sun. Torin stood among them, his cybernetic claw gleaming as he barked orders. They're massing at Grid 4 Delta's edge. But they won't bomb us. Not yet, The network's too valuable. Valuable how? Rhea asked, her voice trembling but curious. She'd been a pilot once, her instincts sharp despite her damaged hands. What's so special about this tech? Veyra's lips twitched, almost a smile. It's not just tech. It's a galactic relay. Instant communication across systems, no lag, no interference. The Dominion spent billions trying to replicate Klythian's signal abilities. They failed, but they left the infrastructure here, buried in Omicron 9. If I control it, we control their voice. Elias's mind spun. A network that could reach across the galaxy, faster than light, faster than anything the Dominion had. It was a weapon, a lifeline, a chance. So we take the hub, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Then what? They'll come for us. They will, Veyra said, her hands resuming their dance over the crystals. But we'll be ready. The hub has defensive systems, pulse cannons, electromagnetic barriers. I can wake them up. We hold this place, we hold the planet. And then? Torm asked, his cough punctuating the silence. We just sit here, waiting for them to starve us out? Veyra's head tilted, her black eyes glinting. No. We send a signal. A call to every labor camp, every salvage rig, every forgotten soul the Dominion's thrown away. We tell them there's a place for them here. A place where broken means strong. Elias felt a spark ignite in his chest, the same fire he'd felt when he'd refused Torin's offer. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something worth fighting for. Let's do it, he said, meeting Veyra's gaze. Tell us what to do. Her plan was audacious, bordering on insane. The signal hub was buried deep beneath the cavern, accessible only through a network of maintenance tunnels riddled with radiation leaks and unstable debris. Veyra could navigate them, her connection to the network guiding her through the maze. Elias, Rhea, Torm, and Silas would follow, each with a role. Elias would scout ahead, his eyes compensating for Veyra's blindness. Rhea, despite her trembling hands, could still read navigational data, mapping their path. Torm's mechanical knowledge would help bypass security locks. Silas, with his coder's instincts, would handle any digital barriers. They moved out, slipping into the tunnels like shadows. The air grew hotter, thicker, the walls slick with chemical residue that burned Elias's skin on contact. Veyra led, her steps sure, her hands brushing the walls as if reading a language written in vibrations. Stay close, she whispered. The network's awake, but it's restless. Restless? Elias asked, his voice low as he scanned the tunnel ahead. A faint glow pulsed in the distance, like a heartbeat in the dark. It's been dormant too long, Veyra said. It's trying to remember itself. Like me. The tunnels twisted deeper, the air growing heavy with the hum of unseen machinery. Elias's flashlight caught glints of crystal embedded in the walls, their surfaces etched with alien symbols that seemed to shift under his gaze. Every step felt like walking into the belly of a living thing, and Veyra's presence, her quiet confidence, kept him grounded. They reached a sealed bulkhead, its surface scarred with blast marks. Torm knelt, coughing as he examined the lock. Old Dominion tech, he muttered, pulling a tool from his belt. I can crack it, but it'll take time. Veyra placed a hand on the metal, her head tilting. Hurry, she said. They're moving. I can feel their boots on the surface. Torm worked, his scarred hands steady despite his labored breathing. Rhea stood beside him, her shaky fingers tracing a data slate, calling out codes from memory. Silas hovered nearby, muttering to himself as he scanned for digital traps. Elias kept watch, his pulse racing as the hum in the air grew louder, more insistent. The bulkhead groaned open, revealing a chamber vast enough to swallow a starship. At its center stood the signal hub, a towering lattice of crystal and metal, pulsing with a soft, blue-green light. Consoles lined the walls, their screens flickering with streams of alien code. Veyra stepped forward, her hands outstretched, as if greeting an old friend. This is it, she said, her voice resonating with the hub's hum. The heart of Omicron 9. Before they could move closer, an alarm blared, red lights flashing across the chamber. "Intruder detected," a mechanical voice boomed. "Defensive protocols engaged." The floor shuddered, and panels in the walls slid open, revealing automated turrets. Their barrels glowed, charging with a whine that set Elias's teeth on edge. "Veyra!" he shouted, diving for cover behind a console. Rhea and Torm scrambled to follow, while Silas froze, his half-blind eyes wide with panic. Veyra didn't move. She stood in the open, her hands raised, and began to hum, that same signal hymn from their first night, its notes weaving through the air like a thread through a needle. The turrets faltered, their barrels twitching as if confused. The hum grew louder, the crystals in the hub pulsing in sync. "She's hacking it," Silas whispered, his voice awed. "She's talking to the damn thing." The turrets powered down, their lights fading, and the alarm fell silent. Veyra lowered her hands, swaying slightly, as if the effort had drained her. "It's ours," she said, her voice faint but steady. "For now." They moved to the central console, Veyra's hands flying over the controls with a speed that belied her blindness. The screens flared to life, displaying maps of Omicron 9, tunnels, defenses, transport routes. "I'm locking out their access," she said. "Rerouting power to the pulse cannons. They won't get near us without a fight." Elias watched the feeds, his stomach twisting as he saw Torrens' forces spreading out across the surface. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning the salvage fields. "They're not giving up," he said. "How long can we hold this place?" "Long enough," Veyra said, her fingers pausing on a crystal panel. "I'm sending the signal now. A call to every camp, every rig. They'll hear it. They'll come." "And if they don't?" Torm asked, his coughs echoing in the chamber. Veyra's scarred face turned to him, her expression fierce. "They will. The broken always answer when they hear a voice that knows their pain." The signal went out, a pulse that rippled through the network, carried by the planet's geothermal core. Elias imagined it racing across the galaxy, reaching the forgotten. Miners with radiation-scarred lungs, coders deemed too erratic, pilots whose dreams had been crushed by the Dominion's quotas. He imagined them lifting their heads, hearing Veyra's hymn, and knowing there was a place for them. But the Dominion wasn't idle. Hours later, the feeds showed Torrens' forces breaching the outer tunnels. They moved with military precision, their suits shielding them from the radiation. "They're faster than I thought," Veyra said, her voice tight. "They've got signal jammers. They're trying to cut us off." "Can you stop them?" Elias asked, his hand tightening on a scavenged pulse rifle he'd found in the hub. "I can slow them," she said, her hands moving faster over the controls. "But we need to buy time." She activated the defensive arrays, and the feeds showed pulse cannons firing, their beams cutting through the ash to scatter the guards. But the jammers were working, the hub systems flickered, the screens glitching as the network struggled to maintain its connection. "We need to take out those jammers," Rhea said, her voice steadier now. She pointed to a map on the screen, her trembling hands tracing a route. "There's a relay station on the surface, half a click from here. If we destroy it, the network stays online." "It's a suicide run," Torm said, coughing. "That area is crawling with guards." "Then we don't all go," Elias said, his mind racing. "Veyra stays here, keeps the hub running. I'll take the relay station." "Not alone," Rhea said, standing despite her shaking hands. "I'm coming with you. I can still read a map." "I'm in," Silas said, his voice firm despite his fear. Torm nodded, though his coughs made it clear he'd be a liability. "Stay here," Elias told him. "Help Veyra hold the hub." Veyra grabbed Elias's arm, her grip tight. "Don't die out there," she said, her black eyes unreadable but her voice heavy with something like fear. "The network needs you." "You mean you need me?" Elias said, forcing a grin. She didn't reply, but her grip lingered a moment longer before she let go. The surface was a war zone. Elias, Rhea, and Silas crept through the salvage fields, dodging drone sweeps and guard patrols. The relay station was a squat, fortified tower, its surface bristling with antennas that pulsed with disruptive energy. Guards patrolled its perimeter, their suits glinting under the violet sun. Elias's pulse rifle felt heavy in his hands, a reminder of how little he knew about fighting. "We hit fast," he whispered, crouching behind a wrecked hull. "Rhea, guide us in. Silas, watch for traps." Rhea nodded, her data slate glowing faintly as she plotted their approach. Silas scanned the area, his half-blind eyes catching glints of hidden sensors. They moved, darting between cover, the ash muffling their steps. But as they neared the station, a drone buzzed overhead, its scanner locking onto them. "Down!" Elias hissed, tackling Rhea behind a pile of slag. Silas wasn't fast enough. The drone's beam caught him, and he screamed, clutching his arm as the suit's electronics fried. Guards shouted, closing in. Elias fired, his pulse rifle spitting blue arcs that dropped one guard but drew more attention. "Go!" Silas gasped, shoving Elias forward. "I'll hold them!" Before Elias could argue, Silas stood, firing wildly to draw the guard's focus. Rhea pulled Elias toward the station, her trembling hands steady on the slate. They reached the tower's base, where a maintenance hatch gleamed in the ash. "Inside," Rhea said, her voice urgent. Elias pried the hatch open, and they slipped into a cramped control room, its walls lined with humming equipment. The jammers were there, bulky devices pulsing with red light, their signals disrupting the hub's network. Elias raised his rifle, but Rhea stopped him. "Wait. We need to disable them properly, or they'll overload and take out half the grid." She worked quickly, her shaking hands surprisingly precise as she rerouted the jammer's power. Elias stood guard, his heart pounding as shouts echoed outside. Silas's gunfire had stopped, and the silence was worse than any scream. "Hurry," he urged, his eyes on the hatch. "Almost there," Rhea said, her voice tight. The jammer's lights flickered, then died, and the hub's screens flared back to life on her slate. "It's done! Veyra's got control again." But the hatch exploded inward, and guards poured in, their weapons raised. Elias fired, dropping one, but there were too many. Rhea screamed as a guard grabbed her, pinning her trembling arms. Elias lunged, but a baton caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling. Pain seared through him, his vision blurring. Then the air hummed, a bone-deep vibration that made the guard stagger. Veyra's voice echoed through the station, not from a speaker but from the walls themselves, her signal hymn amplified by the hub. The guards' suits sparked, their weapons failing as the network overwhelmed their systems. Elias scrambled to his feet, grabbing Rhea and dragging her toward the hatch. They stumbled back into the salvage field, the guards disoriented behind them. But Silas was gone, his body slumped in the ash, his half-blind eyes staring blankly at the sky. Elias's throat tightened, but there was no time to mourn. They ran, dodging drone beams, until they reached the tunnel entrance. Back in the hub, Veyra was waiting, her hands still on the controls. "You did it," she said, her voice strained. "The network's stable. The signal's reaching further than I hoped." "But Silas," Elias said, his voice breaking. "He didn't make it." Veyra's scarred face softened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. "He made a choice. Like you did. Like I did." She turned back to the console. "The signal's drawing them in. I can hear their ships, salvage rigs, refugee haulers, even a few stolen transports. They're coming." Elias looked at the feeds, his chest tight with a mix of grief and hope. Ships were landing, their hulls scarred and wheezing, spilling out the Dominion's forgotten. Miners, coders, pilots, all deemed worthless. They came with nothing but their scars and their stories, drawn by Veyra's call. Rhea, her hands still shaking, began organizing them, her pilot's instincts kicking in. Torm, coughing but determined, started repairing the hub's defenses. Elias watched the newcomers, their faces a mirror of his own, worn, broken, but alive. Veyra stood beside him, her head tilted as she listened to the symphony of their heartbeats. "This is what we're fighting for," she said. "A place where the broken are whole." But the feeds flickered again, showing Torrens' forces regrouping, joined by heavier transports. "They're not done," Elias said, his voice hard. "They'll hit us with everything they've got." "Let them," Veyra said, her scarred hands glowing faintly as she interfaced with the network. "This is our home now. And we'll defend it." The signal hub pulsed like a living heart, its crystalline spires casting a soft, blue-green glow across the chamber. Elias Kane stood at the central console, his hands gripping the edge, his eyes fixed on the flickering feeds that showed Torrens' forces massing on the surface of Omicron 9. The Dominion's transports loomed like predators, their hulls bristling with weapons, their drones swarming the salvage fields like locusts. Beside him, Veyra moved with a quiet intensity, her scarred hands dancing over the controls, her black eyes unreadable but alive with purpose. The air thrummed with the network's energy, a constant reminder that they were no longer just survivors. They were defenders of something greater. Rhea coordinated the newcomers from a makeshift command post, her trembling hands steady as she directed the ragtag group of refugees and rejects who had answered Veyra's call. Torm, his coughs echoing through the chamber, worked tirelessly to reinforce the hub's defenses, his mechanical expertise breathing life into ancient pulse cannons. The cavern was alive with activity, miners hauling salvaged metal to barricade tunnels, coders patching systems, pilots like Rhea mapping escape routes. They were the Dominion's discarded, but here, in the heart of Omicron 9, they were building a home. Elias's chest tightened as he watched the feeds. Torrens' forces were closing in, their jammers back online, disrupting the network's reach. "They're cutting us off again," he said, his voice low but steady. "How long can we hold them?" Veyra's fingers paused on a crystal panel, her head tilted as if listening to the planet itself. "Not long," she admitted, her voice carrying that strange harmonic that seemed to resonate with the hub. "The jammers are stronger this time. Military grade. They're trying to drown out our signal before it reaches the outer systems." "Can you boost it?" Rhea asked, her data slate glowing as she tracked the incoming forces. "Get the call to more camps?" "I can try," Veyra said, her scarred hands moving faster. "But it'll draw power from the defenses. We'll be vulnerable." She turned her sightless gaze toward Elias, her expression unreadable but heavy with meaning. "It's a risk. Your call." Elias felt the weight of her words, the same weight he'd felt when he'd refused Torrens' offer of freedom. Every choice had led to this moment, standing in a buried chamber, surrounded by the broken, fighting for a chance at something better. "Do it," he said. "Send the signal. If we don't, this all ends here." Veyra nodded, her hands a blur as she rerouted power from the pulse cannons to the network's core. The chamber's hum grew louder, the crystals pulsing brighter, their light casting shadows that danced like ghosts. The feeds flickered, then stabilized, showing the signal's reach expanding, past the inner systems, past the salvage rigs, into the dark corners of the galaxy where the Dominion's forgotten waited. Elias imagined them hearing Veyra's hymn, a call that spoke not of quotas or disposal but of a place where their scars were strength. But the cost was immediate. The defensive arrays faltered, their lights dimming as the hub diverted energy to the signal. On the surface, Torrens' forces advanced, their drones cutting through the ash with precision. "They're breaching the outer tunnels," Rhea reported, her voice tight. "We've got minutes, maybe less. Then we fight," Elias said, grabbing a pulse rifle from a nearby crate. He turned to the newcomers, miners with radiation-burned hands, coders with haunted eyes, pilots whose dreams had been crushed by the Dominion's machine. "This is our home now. They don't get to take it." The chamber erupted into action. Torm rallied a group to man the remaining cannons, his coughs drowned out by the clatter of metal. Rhea organized the defensive line, her pilot's instincts guiding the placement of barricades. Elias led a small team, miners and coders armed with scavenged weapons, toward the main tunnel, where the guards were already pouring in. The fight was brutal. The guards moved like machines, their combat suits shielding them from the hub's residual radiation. Elias fired, his rifle's blue arcs cutting through the ash, dropping one guard but drawing fire from others. Beside him, a miner named Kale, a wiry man with scars crisscrossing his face, fought with a ferocity that belied his frail frame. "For the camps!" Kale shouted, his voice raw as he swung a salvaged steel beam, knocking a guard to the ground. But the guards kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Elias's team fell back, step by step, the tunnel filling with the acrid smell of plasma and blood. A drone's beam grazed his shoulder ferramenta, searing pain through his arm, but he kept firing, his mind fixed on Veyra and the signal. "Hold the line!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "We keep them out!" In the hub, Veyra worked feverishly, her hands trembling as she pushed the network to its limits. The signal was reaching further than she dreamed: labor camps on distant moons, salvage platforms orbiting dead stars, even the hidden colonies where refugees hid from Dominion patrols. She could feel their responses, faint pulses of hope carried back through the network, like whispers in a storm. But the jammers were closing in, their interference clawing at the signal's edges. "It's not enough," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hub's hum. She glanced at Torm, who was rewiring a cannon with shaking hands. "I need more power." "There isn't any," Torm rasped, coughing blood onto his sleeve. "You've got everything the hub can give." Veyra's scarred face tightened, her black eyes glinting with resolve. "Not everything." She moved to the central spire, a massive crystal that pulsed like a star. Its surface was etched with Klythian runes, their glow fading as the jammers tightened their grip. Veyra placed both hands on the spire, her body trembling as she interfaced directly with the network. "I was built for this," she said, her voice resonating through the chamber. "The Dominion made me a weapon. Now I'm their reckoning." Torm grabbed her arm, his eyes wide. "You'll burn out. The neurofeedback will kill you." "Maybe," Veyra said, her voice steady. "But the signal will live." She closed her eyes, her hum rising to a piercing hum that made the crystals vibrate. The hub's lights flickered, then blazed, the signals surging through the network with a force that shook the chamber. Torm staggered back, shielding his ears as the air itself seemed to sing. On the surface, Elias felt the change. The ground trembled, the ash vibrating with a low, resonant frequency. The guards faltered, their suits sparking as the network overwhelmed their systems. Drones fell from the sky, their circuits fried. "What the hell is she doing?" Kale gasped, his steel beams still clutched in his hands. "She's giving us a chance," Elias said, his heart pounding. He rallied his team, pushing forward as the guards retreated, their formation broken. But the victory was fleeting. A new wave of transports landed, their hulls marked with the Dominion's elite insignia, shock troopers, not just guards. Torrin led them, his cybernetic claw gleaming as he shouted orders. Elias's team fell back to the hub, barricading the main entrance. Inside, Veyra was still at the spire, her body rigid, her hum now a scream that echoed through the network. The feeds showed the signal reaching the outer systems, touching minds that had never known hope. But her skin was paling, her bioluminescent motes flickering like dying stars. "Veyra, stop!" Elias shouted, rushing to her side. Her hands were fused to the spire, the crystals glowing so brightly they burned his eyes. "You're killing yourself!" "It's working!" she gasped, her voice layered with pain and triumph. "They're hearing us. They're coming." She turned her sightless gaze toward him, her scarred face radiant despite the strain. "You gave me a reason to fight, Elias. Now let me finish it." Before he could argue, the hub's entrance exploded inward, shock troopers pouring through. Torrin strode in, his energy weapon trained on Elias. "It's over, Kane," he snarled, his claw twitching. "Your weapon's done. Command sending a fleet to glass this place." "She's not a weapon," Elias said, stepping between Torrin and Veyra. "She's a person. And this is our home." He raised his rifle, but Torrin was faster, his weapon's beam grazing Elias's chest, sending him sprawling. Pain seared through him, his vision swimming, but he heard Veyra's hymn grow louder, stronger, resonating through the hub like a tidal wave. The crystals erupted, their light blinding. The troopers staggered, their suits failing as the network's frequency overwhelmed their systems. Torin screamed, clutching his claw as it sparked and died. Veyra's voice rose to a crescendo, her body glowing with the same light as the spire. The hub itself became a weapon, its walls vibrating, its systems turning against the intruders. Elias crawled to his feet, his chest burning, and grabbed Veyra. "Stop!" he pleaded, but her hands were locked to the spire, her body trembling as the network consumed her. "Some voices are worth dying for," she whispered, her words carrying through the network, across the galaxy, to every soul who'd ever been called worthless. "But more are worth living for." The spire flared one final time, and Veyra collapsed, her body limp in Elias's arms. The hub went dark, the crystals dimming, but the signal kept going, carried by the planet's core, unstoppable. The troopers fell, their suits lifeless, and Torin slumped to the ground, his claws sparking uselessly. The feeds showed ships, hundreds of them, approaching Omicron 9, their hulls scarred, their crews the Dominion's forgotten. Elias held Veyra, her bioluminescent motes fading, her breath shallow. "You did it," he whispered, tears burning his eyes. "They heard you." She reached up, her scarred hand trembling as it touched his face. "Not me," she said, her voice barely audible. "Us." Her hand fell, and her eyes, those black voids, closed, her body still. The ships landed, their cargo bays opening to reveal the broken, the discarded, the defiant. Miners with radiation scars, coders with burned-out implants, pilots with shattered dreams. They came in waves, drawn by Veyra's final hymn. Rhea took charge, her trembling hands steady as she organized the newcomers into a community. Torm, coughing but unbroken, began repairing the hub, turning it into a sanctuary. Elias stood in the cavern, Veyra's body cradled in his arms, and looked at the faces around him. They were the Dominion's refuse, but here they were family. He carried Veyra to a quiet corner of the hub, where a single crystal still glowed faintly, and laid her down. "You gave us a home," he said, his voice breaking. "We'll make it worth it." Months later, Omicron 9 was no longer a salvage field. They called it Haven 9, a beacon for the galaxy's unwanted. The hub's signal never stopped, its frequency a constant call to those who'd been discarded. Elias became their leader, not by choice but by necessity, his voice carrying Veyra's message to every new arrival. Rhea trained pilots, her hands steadier with purpose. Torm built defenses, his coughs quieter as he found meaning in his work. The Dominion sent no more fleets. Haven 9 was too strong, its network too vital to destroy. Official reports called it an autonomous zone. Its status anomalous but stable. But to those who lived there, it was something more, a place where broken meant stronger, where different meant valuable, where voices once silenced sang loud enough to shake the stars. Years later, in a distant labor camp, a child with radiation-burned hands found a fragment of a transmitter, its surface etched with Klythian runes. A faint hum emanated from it, carrying words that had crossed the galaxy. "Some voices are worth dying for. But more are worth living for." The child pressed the fragment to his chest, his eyes bright with hope, and whispered, "I hear you." And in the ruins of Haven 9, now a thriving community, Elias stood under a sky no longer bruised but alive with stars. He held a piece of crystal, its surface glowing with Veyra's final hymn, and listened to the voices of the broken, now whole, singing back.